Hello and welcome back to MFA Writers. Before we get to today's conversation with Evan Fleischer of Emerson College, I absolutely have to send a shout out to my friends and past guests, Hannah Kahandig-Taylor, Vanessa Chan, and Kai Tanaka. Wigleaf recently announced their top 50 Flash pieces of the year, and all three of them made the list. We already knew that Hannah, Vanessa, and Kai were awesome, but it makes me so happy to know that others see that too. I can't wait to read the amazing things all of our guests will publish in the coming years. You are all so inspiring. You can find MFA Writers on Instagram and Twitter, as well as mfawriters.com. Feel free to shoot us a direct message on one of those platforms or an email at mfawriterspodcast@gmail.com. We love to hear from listeners. If you have a minute to rate or review the show, the best place to do that is on Apple Podcasts. Doing so will help boost our podcast as we try to boost these amazing writers. Finally, as always, thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome to MFA Writers, the podcast where we talk to creative writing MFA students about their program, their process, and a piece they're working on. I'm your host, Jared McCormick. Today I'm with Evan Fleischer. Evan has written for The New Yorker, The New York Times, The Guardian, The New Republic, Slate, Washington Post, Vice, and numerous other publications. He's been a fiction editor at Hobart Pulp for 2.5 years, and he's also worked as a ghostwriter, a research assistant, and a freelance writer. He's currently in the Fiction MFA program at Emerson College, where he will graduate at the end of the year. Today, he's brought an excerpt to read for us from his novel in progress titled Philadelphia Forever.
Tiny disclaimer before I begin. There's going to be a word here called watergaw. It's Scots. It means broken rainbow. Philadelphia Forever. If we begin at the corner of Broad and Snyder, the watergaw of dawn breaking through grays and glass, then we can talk about the aging man who snatched a pigeon out of the air and walked away as if it was nothing. As if he had finally found what he was looking for while walking down the aisle of a grocery store like Wegmans or down through the streets of the Italian market up on 9th, and that was that. But those who knew Terry Sturbridge also understood that his ability to pull birds out of the air was akin to someone pulling flowers out of his sleeve whenever he wanted, like he was some sort of magician down on the shore. Green parrots, smirking pigeons, seagulls of discerning taste. All of them were available to Terry. His retirement hobby, his early retirement hobby, slowly accelerating away from him into an outright obsession. In idle afternoons, with the gentle talons of a sweet-faced macaw walking out onto his hand, were slowly transitioning into day-long attempts of self-justification to fill the city up with birds. The angle that had brought him up to Broad and Snyder was an attempt at a messenger service. The pigeon was supposed to go from a rooftop on South Bouvier over to a friend of his from the old days over in Cobb's Creek in West Philly, but only got as far as this intersection. And why this intersection? It wasn't a recapitulation of the gauntlet pigeons had faced in the city in the past. Cops firing blanks into the air, some not firing blanks into the air and just opting to drive back to the station with cars covered with what looked like a fallen Sashimono flags from feudal Japan in miniature, a trial run of sorts for the mummers. But something had stopped this bird, who Sturbridge had placed atop a public payphone that was no longer in use. The question now was, what had brought this bird here? A Life with Birds was the second act after a violent first. He had spent some time delivering mail in the hope that the discipline of the job was what his feelings had needed at the time. But the time he spent on his route had only made clear to him that he was seeking some kind of transmutation, not a simple distraction. The old lady with the pink dress who wore her reading glasses on a chain around her neck struck him for all the world as a distinguished spoonbill. The kids trying to start their own fashion company, who hung shirts for sale in their street side window, were kingfishers with Crisco hair waves and the muffled Memphis soul sounds of King Curtis and the sweet inspirations coming from within. The visiting grandmother showing up to meet everyone before some non-Sunday event at a church was so clearly an aging parrot saying, "Give us a kiss," over and over again. The regularity and expectation of regularity in his life did nothing to keep Sturbridge from going to go see Goodfellas at Sedgwick and instinctively imagining how different things could have been if De Niro and co. had owned the Lufthansa airplane they robbed. It did nothing to keep him from stopping to say hello when he looked out the back door connected to his quiet kitchen one morning and saw a sharp-chinned hawk resting on the balcony. The few friends he had left would suggest that he go to a therapist, quote, like Tony, but he could feel the difference between what it meant to focus on a bird and what it meant to focus on anything else. Here was something that made him feel good, a chance to grow wings. "What are you doing, Hoots?" Sturbridge said, opting for a Toots pronunciation instead of following the avian path. He gave him an arcing scratch over the head. "I gave you a message. Not like one of those messages you can type up on the phone or something. You're not here to fly across town and say, 'What's up?'" Hoots ruffled his feathers. Terry continued. "I mean, you know that, right? I'm giving you an important message. Responsibility." If Hoots was a small child, this would have been the moment Terry adjusted Hoots's tie. Instead, he lifted him up and began to walk away. "But instead, you what?" He looked around the intersection, cars slowly hissing to cross town life. "You dragged me out here? For what?" Hoots wriggled in the crevice of his underarm. Sturbridge nodded. "I get that you're antsy, so what do you say?" His voice slowed to a gentle walk. "We go get some fries from Burger King." It wasn't enough. Hoots broke free like a house cat hoisted awkwardly into the air, and a gold-plated pigeon shot through the air above Alicia's head and made its way down the street in one direction as Alicia and her two friends made their way up the street in the other. "I can't believe you do that to that song," Candace said. Alicia was insistent. "I'm not trying to do anything to that song. I love that song." "It's sacrilege. It's play." Candace levied a side eye, replacing the word Jolene in Jolene with wet eggs. She shook her head in tiny little pivots. She wasn't having it. "Give me a break." Alicia took this as a cue to sing the modified song again. "Wet eggs, wet eggs, wet eggs, wet eggs. I'm begging of you, please don't take my man." Shay raised an eyebrow as she imperiously flicked through her phone. "Why are wet eggs taking your man, Alicia?" Alicia paused, realizing that she was getting a clean alley-oop. "Because they can?" "Jesus H," Candace replied. "Jesus I. Jesus J. Jesus K. Somebody better get me a whole alphabet's worth of Jesuses before you what?" Alicia said, tilting her head. "Invent Mormonism?"
Evan, thanks so much for reading. Thanks for being here.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
That was great. Do you have a theater background by chance?
No, I'm a performative person. I did a lot of sketch comedy a long time ago. I did a lot of improv a long time ago. I did a lot of terrible stand-up a long time ago. But no sort of, please go explore the space sort of hardcore theater training. No.
Well, you did a great job reading that. That was really enjoyable. And, I was looking at your bio. I was doing a little bit of research on you, and you have some great publications on your resume, these big, publications like the New Yorker, New York Times, The Guardian, most of which are for nonfiction pieces that you've written over the years. So why get an MFA and why in fiction?
Well, one answer I can offer up as I enter into the home stretch of the program at Emerson College is that the MFA has been a good accelerant. I'm a writer. Writing would have happened regardless of the program, but the program at Emerson College has been good in terms of no, come on, let's go. But in terms of why fiction in relation to this program, I'm a fiction writer. I'm a writer, but I'm at my strongest when it's fiction. I can flex in fiction in a way I can't in nonfiction.
Well, yeah, my co-producer and I found you through a flash fiction piece you'd written for HAD, and you've also published some poetry over the years. So What made you want to write a novel in the MFA? Was that something that you knew going in that you wanted to do, or something that you decided along the way?
It's something I knew going in that I wanted to do. I love the breadth of expression a novel can afford you, which isn't to say that you can't achieve the same thing with short fiction. You absolutely can. I mean, Alice Munro exists. Borges exists. Exactitude is important. But there is something about the way in which you can weave figurative melody lines together in a novel that is satisfying and, for the moment, worth my time.
So had you written a novel before this, or attempted a novel before joining Emerson? Were you writing this novel before you went there, or was this something that you started when you started at Emerson?
I had the idea before I got to Emerson, but it took a while to chisel down through the rock and realize what the form actually was. I had the idea for this novel, and I knew it was a good idea. And even though I kept producing drafts in which, I'd look at them in the aftermath and just be like, well, no, this ain't right. I still knew it was a good idea. And it took several different iterations, maybe 4 or 5, before we got to the 3 pages that I read at the top of this program. And now that I know what the novel is, now that I know what the diving board is, it's full speed ahead. And I am enjoying that, and I am enjoying that process. As for writing a novel before entering the program, attempts were made.
Yeah.
A lot of the time I have this reaction of like, oh, what's this over here? And oh, what's this over here? And isn't this interesting here? And so in earlier attempts to write novels before the program, there was a lot of happy distraction at work.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it goes back to what you said about when you're in the program, you have like deadlines and you're being pushed to like keep writing. I don't know if it's like this for you, but for me, maybe before the program, it was easier for me to have an idea to start working on it. Maybe it's not quite coming together how I thought it would, and then I would move to something else. Where in the program, you're getting that push to keep going, to keep working through it until you get to the point where you are now, where you can keep working forward.
Well, it's not only the push; it's the expectation that there will be something. You can have a generous, empathetic, generative environment. You can have someone who thinks that being a hard ass is the way to go and to produce results. But I think that regardless of either approach, the way at the end in which something will happen is that there are these deadlines. Something is supposed to happen. And in entering into the program, people are buying into that agreement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. And I don't know about you or people in your cohort, but I've found that the deadlines can be super helpful, knowing that like, okay, I have to have 2 short stories this semester for workshop, and I've got to keep going, and I've got to get a draft out and be ready for workshop. But also sometimes I find the deadlines can be a bit much. Like sometimes I just need to step back and like let something simmer, but I feel like, no, I can't because I have this deadline for workshop that I have to get to. Is that something you ever ran into, or are you just like a really deadline oriented person where that really like motivates and helps you?
I am both. And I think the best way I can sort of respond is to tell a story Leonard Cohen once told about meeting Bob Dylan, where they were at some cafe in Italy somewhere, and Cohen said, and Dylan said, how long did it take? Well, since it's his birthday today, the day that we're recording this, I'll do the voice, which is how long did it take you to do Hallelujah? And Cohen said, like, oh, it took 7 or 8 years to, and Cohen, wanting to be generous, said, I quite liked the song I and I. How long did it take you to write that? And Dylan said, 15 minutes. And the point of that anecdote and the terrible voices involved in that is to say that there are times in which I am the 15-minute guy, and there are times in which I am the 8-year guy, and I can't necessarily plan for that. In a way, it feels like I am reacting to the weather when that happens. And there's a degree to which you can say 80% of our time in workshop is focused on providing feedback and critique and notes, so that our focus is tilted a little bit more towards the analytical than the creative in some. But I think it's also reasonable in a certain way and to a certain extent to say, like, well, yeah, but you can walk and chew gum at the same time too. So you need to figure out how to, even if you are that 8-year Leonard Cohen guy, I mean, you need to just push a little bit and do something, like, regardless of the fact that the time and the habit and the building up of the muscle of our focus is tilted in the direction of critique.
Well, Evan, you've really raised the bar now. I expect a Leonard Cohen or Bob Dylan story for every answer from here on out.
You heard it here first, folks. Yeah. Take that between the covers. But anyway.
I mean, so this excerpt is really interesting. And one of the things that really intrigued me was the structure of it and the sort of like switching of perspectives that happens in the middle of it. How is the novel structured? Does it switch between characters like that throughout the whole story?
Well, there are 4 main characters in this book, and we only got 2 in the bit that was read. There's a bit of the answer here is a little bit complicated, and it might go down some paths. So I'm warning both you and listeners in advance. The shifts in perspective in this book are there to help ground the reader in place, because this book is going to be a book that answers the question what it means to make and unmake a place. The first sentence is, if we began from the corner of Broad and Snyder, the implication being that this story can start from anywhere. There's the fact that Hoots the Pigeon is followed by sentences that talk about where Alicia and her friends are in the city and where they're going. They're ultimately going to go to Wanamaker's. When we get to the third character, this third character is exploring ways in which he can take the city away from people. And then when we get to the fourth, we are encountering a character who is just happy to aimlessly drive in the city because he feels such an empathetic connection with all of it. And finding ways to emphasize place is important because there are a lot of things connected to place. When we talk about place, we often talk about setting, but there is a dimensionality to place that has a lot of different strands. There's the economic determinism based off of like which zip code you were born in. It will determine what sort of life you have. You can have a favorite restaurant or a favorite coffee shop or a favorite bar. And that is something that, you can have a relationship with one of those things that exists through time. But working on a novel structure that focuses on place through character in hopefully a non-didactic sort of way is also about power analysis. And I think one thing that has struck me over the years has been the gap between the way in which certain writers talk about place. Alistair Gray and Glasgow, Patrick Modiano and Paris, Dickens in London, Pamuk in Istanbul. They all write about place in an excellent way and well. And Grace kind of starts to get there when he's talking about neoliberal development in Glasgow, but power is connected to place in a huge way. Just to drop a few facts on folks. Real estate makes up 60% of the world's monetary assets. 75% of that 60% is in housing. Investor purchases of homes are at 20-year highs. And this is an extreme example. And I'm pulling some of these facts and figures from a book called Capital City by Samuel Stein, which was put out by Verso. But from the 1950s to the present day, New York City has lost about 750,000 manufacturing jobs, while at the same time, the value of the land went from $20 billion to $400 billion. As of 2018, there are 2.5 million fewer units in this country renting for $800 or less, which is what the typical renter can afford. And in Detroit and about 6 or 7 other states in this country, the homes of Black families are assessed in excess of 50% of their value, which subsequently raises the land taxes on their home, which the families can't pay, which leads to eviction. All of which is to say that when I am structuring a novel that wants to dig into the idea of place and the power analysis of place, I am doing these shifts to say that all these people are connected in the same place, and that this isn't just about sinking into character, although it absolutely is. It's about sinking into character, sinking into place.
I mentioned earlier that we found you through a flash fiction piece you published with havehashad.com, which is one of my favorite places to read flash fiction because of how strange and interesting the pieces can be there. That piece you wrote is titled The Joke, and the majority of the piece is the word ha, H-A-H, over and over again with kind of interjections from people who have heard a joke that's made everyone laugh so much that they're kind of losing their minds and descending into a sort of zombie apocalypse. I'm not sure if I'm really describing it that well. I encourage everyone to go to mfawriters.com and find the link and read the piece. It's super interesting. It reminded me a lot of Amelia Gray, who writes a lot of flash fiction that kind of defies description. And it seems to me that we're in like this post-modernist moment in which there's a lot of experimentation and self-awareness and embrace of genre elements in fiction today. Where would you say that your writing fits in? How would you describe it?
It depends on what I wanted to do. I feel there's a degree to which I feel like a very practical writer for all the sort of, experimentation that you're describing in this piece in terms of just, okay, I want to write a story in which I'm centering the fact that there is a kind of zombie apocalypse because everyone is laughing. How do I do that? Okay, I want to start a story with a man snatching a pigeon out of the air, which is a real event. How do I do that? I want to start a story that is autofiction-ish, that tries to answer the question, okay, what would happen if Evan Fleischer was trying to make friends with LeBron James? And I build from there. How would you answer that question?
Well, I think it depends, right? I mean, it depends on the piece. I think that's interesting that you're starting sometimes with like either a random idea, like the zombie apocalypse from Laughter. Like that's a strange idea, but it's like, it's almost like a challenge, right? It's like, okay, now I have this really weird idea. I could just throw it away, or I could push myself to just see what happens, right? Give myself the freedom to write something that doesn't work at all. And that's fine, right? I find that that's the way when my writing's really working, especially when I'm writing, this is why I love Flash. It gives you that freedom to just like go nuts and just try something, right? Experiment with something. And if it doesn't work, that's okay. Put it away, maybe come back to it later. But sometimes it is grounded more in reality. Like you said, like the guy with the pigeon, that was something you saw and you were like, okay, that's interesting. Now let's build a story from there. So is that usually what happens for you? You have like an idea or an image and then it just goes from there?
Kind of. But just to sort of belatedly answer the question regarding how I would classify myself, I wouldn't necessarily classify myself by category, but I could cite some people I am like inheriting traditions from.
Mm-hmm.
Robert Coover, Don Barthelme, Joy Williams, Virginia Woolf, Pynchon, the Italian writer Cesare Pavese, Calvino. It's not, despite the many ways in which I can change my voice or change my style or transform things in one direction or the other, I think in terms of people I'm inheriting stuff from, and not to ignore Douglas Adams, Kurt Vonnegut, or Wodehouse either, I would say those are some of the names that, like, if you wanted to understand my work and see what I'm continuing or like trying to move forward or further, those are some people to check. And to the question you just asked before I jumped back to the previous question, do you know when you're sort of joking around with someone and a joke occurs to you, the shape of it, and you realize like, oh, this is how they're all going to react. They're going to find this funny because of this. And there's a certain weird mental fullness to that like split second moment that feels much longer than it actually is. That's the best way I can describe some of the ways in which I get my ideas. In that, I will hear a line or a line will occur to me, and then all of a sudden there is a kind of blossoming. There's a kind of series of webs and offshoots that happen. There's a kind of little depth charge. And then it's a question of assessing the weight of that idea. And then in assessing the weight of that idea, you can then say to yourself, okay, this is Flash. Okay, this is a novel. Okay, this is XYZ.
That's super interesting. And I think that's a really important part of writing, is like being able to recognize that moment, that flash moment in your brain where you realize, or you have an idea about something occurs to you, being able to recognize that it's worth exploring and writing, that it could work in a story, being able to identify whether it should be Flash or maybe it could be a novel. This is something that I don't hear writers talk about that much. And maybe because it's kind of hard to describe, right? I mean, it's really hard to quantify that or practice that, but you do have to practice that. You have to be able to recognize, I have ideas all the time. 90% of them will not work for stories, right? And part of the thing that I have to work on, the skill I have to build, is recognizing which of those to pursue. But there has to be a balance, right? Because you mentioned Donald Barthelme, who's someone I look to a lot. His whole thing was not knowing, right? You shouldn't know what you're writing about when you sit down to write. And I find that, like that story that you published and had that we've been talking about, that there were like really surprising moments in there. And I find to really authentically surprise the reader, you have to be kind of surprising yourself as you write. And that's hard to do if you know what the whole story is going to look like before you even sit down to write it.
Oh, yeah. No. And to be clear, I wouldn't be doing this if one of my main drives was that, I need to surprise myself. Yeah, because, to jump back to stand-up for a second, one reason why I was so bad at it was that I got bored with doing the same 5 minutes week after week. I know how to be funny. I don't know how to be funny in a sort of like 5-minute thing to an audience that is used to certain parameters of performance. I'm much more interested in a longer relationship with an audience and exploring surprise in relation to that. And also because, the factor of surprise is our editorial brain at work too. You can say, oh, I didn't know I could do that. I didn't know I could do the Had story before I did it. I didn't know I could do the story Subway Advice for LeBron James before I did it. And that makes it worthwhile. Yeah, if anyone out there is a writer on the verge of applying to a certain program, please ring fence your sense of surprise, regardless of the path you take through the program, because that is one of the things that will keep your writing as you're writing.
Sometimes when I've written some of my best stuff, I'll look back on it and I'll think, or I'll say out loud, that's a really cool line, or like, that's a really interesting turn. And it feels like I'm patting myself on the back. But the honest feeling that I have is that I don't know where that came from.
Yeah. And that's fine. I mean, I have run a weekly Dungeons and Dragons game for over a year and a half now. And I have that same feeling of, well, wait, where did this come from all the time? And for those of you who don't know, Dungeons and Dragons is essentially a collective storytelling game with friends, with dice that tell you that you can do something or that you can't do something. And, there was one scene I was playing with someone where it was set on a pirate ship, and I was playing a bear who was a cook on the pirate ship. And the bear was really sunny and friendly and confident, a kind of like, Brian Blessed on decaf kind of dude. And midway through my conversation with one of my players, I realized, oh, wait a second, this bear is a terrible cook. and that surprised me and opened up the character to me enormously. And it was such a small detail that was such a nice gift. That means that everyone else on this pirate ship knows that he's a terrible cook, but maybe because he's a bear, they sort of like kind of leave him alone and like indulge him. And there's like this weird now social tension with all of these other characters who are moving around. And like maybe the bear tries new recipes and each one is like worse than the last. And like, how does that keep happening? And like surely the bear will notice at some point. And what does that mean when that happens? And I don't know how the brain manages to surprise itself. I don't know if it's tied to the portion of our brain tied up with improvisation, but I am glad that it is there. And I'm glad that just speaking for myself, I'm glad that I have a relationship with that portion of my brain. It makes things worthwhile.
Yeah. Well, we've talked a lot about process now, but I also want to talk a bit about reading fiction. You've been a fiction editor at Hobart for 2.5 years. Hobart's another wonderful, reputable place to find new flash fiction.
Submit.
How has working there influenced you as a writer?
It's made me a better writer because, and first of all, shout out to Aaron Birch, who created Hobart and had and is working on, I think it's called Words and Sport with Crow Jonah Norlander, who gave me this position as a fiction editor. It makes me a better writer because, for two reasons. One, I often publish what I wish I had written. And two, it's the reps. I have to read 200 to 300 submissions every 3 months. And doing that again and again and again teaches you to notice who has done the work and who needs work. You can tell almost right away within, a paragraph, the time someone has put in to putting a story together. And it's really beneficial because, we've sort of been like loosely circling around the idea of like comedy and performance and theater and things like that. When you're doing comedy, you hear someone laugh, you know that you have done a good job. When you are a writer and you are sending a story off to somewhere, you are doing that alone. You are not doing that in concert with anyone else. So the benefit of being an editor is I can all of a sudden line up 5 or 10 or 300 different stories all next to each other. And I can see, oh, this person is just, reacting to the Kavanaugh hearings. This person doesn't quite understand how to put something together, or this is a draft that's gone through multiple drafts. You can see the layering at work. You can see the quote unquote figurative muscle of the piece moving, and doing that again and again and again. Editing is an experience I would recommend to any writer in any program, because it not only strengthens that sense of here's what I need to do to get my writing where I need to get it, but it humbles you isn't quite the right phrase, but it's this thing of just like, oh, here are a collection of writers, and it's not my job to be the voice that overrides these writers. You can then sit back and just say like, oh, I wouldn't have thought of that. That's a really interesting use of voice. I wouldn't have thought of that. That's fascinating. And that's the kind of TLDR emotional summary for what I've done over the past 2.5 years with a terrific amount of terrific writers, some of whom I've even become friends with. So,
well, you mentioned you can tell how much time's been put into a piece, but it's not enough just to be polished, right? I mean, you said that
right.
You're mostly publishing things that you kind of wish you had written. So I imagine, I've done some editing myself, you get all of these submissions, and there is a certain amount that rises to the top that are very polished, but then there's something else that you're looking for to actually publish one of them, right? And so right. What is it, if you can possibly put that in words, that like grabs you or surprises you or makes you say, I wish I had written that, I want to publish this?
It's either a writer who takes relationships, and I don't just mean like romantic relationships, but person-to-person relationships, like individual, like relationship with self. Someone who takes relationships seriously and in an adult way, a kind of empathetic patience, and also, a willingness to sort of miasmically absorb the emotions of like another person in the story. I also look for wonder. I guess it might be the best way to put it, a sense of, someone who is able to sort of crack open a door in something and say, hey, come through here. This is amazing. Maybe the writing equivalent of a Jonathan Richman song. I'm not quite sure, but yeah, regarding the latter, one of the first stories I published was something called The House Party by Benjamin Kessler. And the opening sentence is, we threw a house party and everyone came. And then you quickly realize it is this extraordinarily and delicately balanced thing about like, oh, Charlemagne is at this party and he's over by the rose bushes. And like Hemingway is asking where he can put his bicycle, and maybe we would put it over there. And it sounds, there's a way in which conveying that kind of story can topple over so easily. But Ben did such a good job in terms of the balance of the line, and that I still think of it, and I'm glad he sent it to me, and I'm glad I published it.
We talked a bit about like the subconscious and like that mysterious place that we feel the spark when we have an idea. And I wonder if like reading fiction, good fiction for the first time is also hitting kind of that same place. Like if that's like that same place where we get sparks for our own stories is where we can kind of feel that something is working in a new piece when we read it, right? Like, I think it might be the same part of the brain. I just don't know. I just don't know how to grab it.
I thought we were both like neuroscientists. I thought that's what this interview was. It was neuroscientist to neuroscientist. No, I hear you.
You say like you often publish stuff that you wish you had written.
Yeah.
And so I imagine it's like, when I have an idea that I know is going to work for a story, I feel that. And when I read a story that I wish I had written, it's like, oh, like, why didn't I think of that? Like in that same part of my brain in which, I feel that spark when I get an idea. And maybe that's an indication that something's like really working.
That's true. Or that, there's a larger degree of brotherhood and sisterhood and personhood at work than we might think. And that the kind of gossamer threads by which we build that are worth holding on to. Maybe there is something in good fiction that keeps escaping us. And that is the thing that in its sort of eddies, in its wake, ends up creating sort of new bursts of artistry, empathy, or, in the long, long term, changes in structural power. Yeah.
I say let's go with that.
Very generous of you.
Yeah, I say let's go with that because that's I think is a romantic idea. I mean, we're trying to put into words this thing that is incredibly mysterious to all of us.
Yeah,
and maybe good fiction is the fiction that reminds us that this is a mysterious process that we can't really quantify. We can't really put our finger on it, but it does leave in its wake a feeling that we go back for again and again.
And I think what makes this interesting is that when people imitate others, and you can tell they're imitating others, that's sort of like that's an obvious side effect of it, but that's the wrong way to do it because imitation isn't inheritance, and so people might get a Borges story wrong because they think like, oh, it's about like mysterious texts and labyrinths and things like that. And it's like, well, no, that's not what he was about. It's not about the set dressing. But there are plenty of writers who have come out over the years who think that's the way to go. And, thank goodness we decided to solve literature today in this conversation. but I think, I think that's another dynamic at play too, worth flagging.
Well, clearly we could talk forever in circles about writing and craft, but I'm obligated as part of my job as the host of the show to talk about Emerson College and their MFA program. So,
how much do they pay you?
Nothing. So let's talk about the MFA program. Emerson College, located in Boston, Massachusetts. You study fiction, but the program offers tracks in poetry and nonfiction. It's a 48 credit hour program, so I assume it takes about 3 years to complete, but there are full-time and part-time options that allow students up to 7 years to finish the program. So what was it that drew you to Emerson?
I either wanted to go to Houston, the MFA program there. I either wanted to go to UVA, or I want to go home to Boston. I was in the Tidewater area of Virginia at the time when I was applying, and I like Boston. I grew up in Medford, which is near Tufts University, and Medford, Somerville, and Cambridge are kind of like the unofficial honorary parts of Boston, even though they are their own distinct and separate things. I wanted to head home and enjoy roaming around Boston like I did when I was younger.
So did I get that right when I said it probably takes about 3 years to complete the program?
Yeah, it takes about 3 years to complete the program. Sometimes people power through and do 2 years. Some people, like myself, do 2.5 years, basically. And some people do 3.
So what's a typical semester look like? How many courses are you taking each semester? Let's say if you want to finish in 3 years.
Yeah, you are taking 2 classes a semester. You're taking a workshop in your field of speciality, and you are taking something else to complement that. So, it's not uncommon to take a workshop class and a literature class. If you want to teach undergrads in the 3rd year, you might take a class that gets you ready to teach undergrads. But it's pretty much that. Workshop size is about 11 or 12 students. We meet around 6 in the evening. We usually go to 8:45 or so. And then we all disappear into the night.
It seems like when I was exploring the website that the program is trying to make itself accessible to working people. It seems like a lot of classes are at night, like you mentioned, or you can go there full-time or part-time if you have something else going on and stretch out the time you're in the program. So are there a lot of working people who are in the program?
Everyone in the program pretty much works. Boston is an insanely expensive city. One reason being housing, and it's no coincidence that I am writing a novel that tackles that. Yeah, everyone works just because of how insane the rent is in Boston. And some people work full time and then swing by class in the evening. Some people work full time and only take one class a semester. Some people are parents who can only, make the time for one class. But yeah, everyone works.
Yeah. You mentioned that the workshops are like 11 or 12 students. Do you have a sense of how big the program in general is? Like how many students are they bringing in each year?
I don't know how many students they're bringing in each year, but I saw a job posting for an adjunct not too long ago for the program, and they mentioned that there are over 250 students in the program.
In the MFA program?
Yeah.
That's big.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I don't know everyone at the school, and it is a striking thing. I have a few friends at a program in North Carolina, and I swear to God, there's only it sounds like there's only 9 people there, and they all know each other. The program at BU is probably no more than 20 or something altogether. And so the fact that it is 250 plus is quite something.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was applying for programs, one of the programs was University of Tennessee in Knoxville. I was waitlisted there, and so I went and visited, and they told me they were only accepting 2 fiction students.
That's okay.
Well, I guess I'm not going here.
Well, Knoxville's lost, even though Knoxville can often be a great place. But yeah.
But yeah, some programs are tiny. And I wonder if that 250 includes not just the MFA program you're in, but also there's a second MFA program at Emerson. It's an online MFA in popular fiction and writing and publishing. So, and then there's also an MA in publishing. I saw, it looks like there's 3 or 4 different kind of tracks that you can take. I wonder if that 250 maybe is all of those students combined and not just the MFA program you're in.
Yeah, no, I think so, because, there's also poetry, there's nonfiction, and it's not that hard to hit 250 if you have 4 or 5 different programs. I don't know too much about the MFA in popular fiction program, although I do know one of my favorite teachers in the program also teaches in that program as well, and she is running a course on fabulous and futurist literature that looks at Ted Chiang, Amal El-Mohtar, N.K. Jemisin, Kelly Link, and tackles some questions I'm also interested to in terms of how does one write an unreal happening in a way that feels real and things like that.
You said you didn't know too much about the popular fiction program, but is there some crossover? If you wanted to take a course that would normally be for that program, could you take that course if you wanted to take a genre fiction workshop or something, for instance?
Yeah, no, you can. It would count towards the credits that you need to accumulate outside of your declaration. So if I was declaring in poetry, I could take a popular fiction course, but it would count to the non-poetry credits of of my degree.
So when I look at the website, it describes the program you're in as like a literary program. And I would describe your writing as literary, but there are some genre elements in some of your stories, like that Had story we've talked about a couple times now. There's like the zombie thing going on. So would you say that the program you're in is fairly open to people who are exploring genre elements in their writing?
Yes. I would say that the teachers here, though they do have their preferences and their styles and their own sense of this is the right way to go about it, are all open and are all quite canny and quite good. I think that's one thing. It's a shame that I'm only mentioning this now, but one of the pleasant surprises about this program for me has just been I've enjoyed all of the teachers. I think they've all been real good in terms of just listening to where you are as a writer, responding, and pushing you in each of their own unique ways. There are 2 or 3 teachers in the program who lean a little bit more in a realist direction, but most of the others are happy to read whatever. And so if you are handing in a Zane Grey copy, Zane Grey being a famous Western writer, they'll say, all right, how can we make this the best Western piece of writing that it can be? And if there are elements of the genre that need interrogation, they will interrogate those elements, as well they should.
Let's talk a little bit more about like the workshop setting, because one of the things you told me before the interview was that you were particularly interested in how to make a good workshop out of this group of people from diverse backgrounds and diverse styles of writing coming together. So tell me about that. What did you mean by that? What is it that excites you about trying to make a good workshop?
Because you are learning to listen to where people are. You're learning how to become a teacher, in effect. Someone might convey the sense that, they are a little bit stuck in their own head. And so you might have to edge towards being a little bit blunter with them. Someone might be preoccupied with nerves and anxiety. And so you have to say like, hey, I get anxious too. I get nervous too, but you did this well, and this well. And all you need to do to fix this is to fix, X, Y, Z. It sounds simple, but it is always fascinating to do because not everyone is automatically interested in or game for becoming a little writing team. And I think that's what interests me about the process. I get to play like a secret coach. It's important to find ways to honor people's enthusiasms. It's important to find ways to affirm people. And in all of this, this act of slow listening, it teaches you how to help move people along in the process.
You mentioned that workshop kind of shows us how to teach in a way. This is one thing I was curious to ask you about because, we mentioned that there's that popular fiction program that's online, but the one you're in is a residency program. And usually with residency programs, there are opportunities for things like funding and more extracurricular activities. It doesn't appear, just looking at the website, that Emerson is a fully funded program, but are there opportunities for funding, for teaching, fellowships, things like that?
They exist. There are opportunities to get some funding. There are opportunities to teach in the 3rd year. There are opportunities to work on campus. I guess I would say in relation to that is that Boston is a very expensive city.
You mentioned Boston is expensive, but I imagine that there are also a wealth of opportunities in publishing and literary organizations around the city. What kind of opportunities are there through Emerson? I know Plowshares is published there, and they're regarded as one of the best lit mags in the country. What other things are available?
There is a grad magazine called Redivider that students in the program shape and publish on their own. There is something called the Boston Book Festival that happens every year that people from the program sometimes work on and with. There's a variety of opportunities that come in, and the program is very good at emailing us about them. And there are people and publishers in the area that have hired Emerson students in the past that will just message the program and say, hey, we're looking to hire X, Y, or Z. We had Emerson students in the past. They were great. Could you please send us some more? And that could be either, Harvard University Publishing, Beacon Hill Press, or a few others.
And what about Plowshares? Are there opportunities for students in the MFA program to work at Plowshares?
Yeah, there are. Students can apply to. First, I think it's important to remind folks that, you can't apply to be editor of Plowshares right away. But there are opportunities to, look at databases they have set up and organize those. There are opportunities to sort through incoming submissions. Mm-hmm. There are opportunities to sort of enter in at the bottom of the ladder and help make sure that the magazine stays the magazine that it is.
And, you mentioned going through the slush pile. So we talked about you working for Hobart. Any opportunity to read submissions? I imagine if you could get a reading job at Plowshares, it would be really interesting and helpful for your writing. So in general, would you say that the program and the professors in the program are helpful in finding these opportunities and maybe hooking students up with these types of things?
Yes. They are. They're busy but generous. Mm-hmm. is how I would characterize them. I was looking for work a little over a year ago, and one of my professors misinterpreted it as me saying that I was going to leave the program, which I wasn't. But she was saying things like, "Oh, I can hook you up with my agent in New York, who should be able to put you in touch regarding editing jobs here, and here," which is wonderful.
Before we go, I want to give you the last word. Anything we missed, any advice you have for listeners, or anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to?
I have a craft lecture coming up that if folks want to drop by that and hear me talk about bending the real and grounding the surreal, I'd love to welcome folks in. That craft lecture is on June 15th at 7 p.m. There is no specific organization attached to that. It is being spearheaded by an agent friend of mine named Cassie Murray. And you should be able to find her on Twitter. And other than that, I mean, good luck to those of you applying. If folks ever want to email me with questions about Emerson, I'm more than happy to answer them. And for those of you who are in programs, keep going.
And we'll be sure to get a link up for that craft lesson on the website. Listeners can go to mfawriters.com to find that. Evan, thanks so much for being here. Thanks for taking the time. It's been great talking to you.
Yeah, likewise.